Today was day 20 in Karen Read's retrial, and it was actually the last day for a little while. Judge Cannoni told the jury today at the end of the day that they do not even have to come back tomorrow on Thursday. Originally, they were going to have to come back for a half a day at least, but they are so ahead of schedule that they do not have to come back tomorrow. And they do not have to come back on Friday or Monday. So the next day for trial in Karen Read's case is going to be Tuesday, 9 a.m. So we will definitely see you all back here for the live stream continuing on Tuesday. Now, before we jump into the recap today, I do want to make one mention, and that is that you know that a couple of days ago, we went to the lab and we came out with this Wisniewski t-shirt. The Wisniewski t-shirt has sold, and there are certain people that wanted their Wisniewski t-shirt, but unfortunately, it is no longer available. So we had to go back to the lab and put all of our brains together to come out with another t-shirt that's witty and quick and has a lot of depth behind it. So we came out with the following t-shirt for all of you out there who have been following the case and understand the depth of this t-shirt. This t-shirt is for you. So take a look at it. Boom. Smash the acknowledge button. Anyone who's familiar with Yuri Buchanan's testimony can understand the depth behind that t-shirt. There's a number of different messages behind it. So if this t-shirt speaks to you, I will leave a link in the description. And in case you were not able to get your Wisniewski t-shirt, you can definitely get this t-shirt. All right, let's move on to the recap. So we started off the day with a little bit of a surprise because we're all sitting here waiting for trial to begin like every other day. And it started off with some fireworks because that's what we've come to expect in the Karen Read case. You never know what to expect in the Karen Read case. So let's show you exactly how it started. I don't have to tell you. I'll just play it for you. So we're all sitting here waiting for the trial to begin, and this is how it starts.
Good morning, jurors. So an issue has come to my attention that is going to make it necessary that I talk to each one of you individually over at sidebar with counsel. So that process will take a little while. So I'm going to don't speculate as to what I'm going to talk to you about. Please, when you go back to the deliberation room, talk about anything but this case, and I'll see each of you individually. And the process may take time. The cameras will be shut off, and I'm going to talk to the lawyers about whether we no filming. All right, send you back.
So that's it. That's how the day started off. Cameras off. I have to speak to the jurors, each one individually at sidebar privately, and everyone was kicked out of the courtroom. And in fact, not only was everyone kicked out of the courtroom, but everybody was kicked off the entire floor where this courtroom is located. So some serious business going on with the jury. What could possibly be the cause for this? Well, if you listen to the entire trial and watch the entire trial, then you may notice something at the end of trial today, something that's different from what Judge Cannoni usually says to the jury at the conclusion of the day. So that's why you got to watch all the way to the end to see if there's anything different that you can pick up. So we got some clues as to what happened because of what Judge Cannoni tells the jury at the end of the day. So here we go. Let me play it for you. This is how Judge Cannoni says goodbye to the jury. Listen carefully.
I know you don't like it when we're at sidebar. We don't like it when we're at sidebar, but I can tell you that after speaking to the lawyers now, we're ahead of schedule. And they've worked very hard to get us to this point where we're ahead of schedule so that tomorrow, instead of being a half a day, you have tomorrow off. So you have tomorrow and Friday, a good long weekend. It's very, very important. Do not discuss this case with anyone. Don't say a word about this case. Don't let anybody say anything to you about this case. Don't do any independent.
Okay, so stop right there. If you've been watching this trial, then you know how these last three instructions go. She always does the same three instructions, but this time was a little bit different. The first instruction that she leaves the jury off with. Usually it's just, okay, don't discuss this case with anybody. Here was a much longer speech. Don't discuss this case with anybody. Never. Just don't talk about it. And don't let anybody else talk to you about the case. Well, that certainly suggests that maybe that was the issue here. That maybe one of the jurors told Judge Cannoni by these sidebars that apparently there's some sort of report. Somebody said something, which is how these things get out. Somebody said something about talking to a juror on this case. And it seems that the juror told Judge Cannone that this person really spoke to them and was telling them about their thoughts about the case. And really, I was telling them to stop. We don't know exactly what the conversation was, but it seems that seemed to have been some sort of the excuse that actually somebody came to her or him and was talking to her or him about this case. And maybe she or he tried to run away or whatever it was, but that was the issue. So all the jurors are still remaining seated in this case. So the same jury, nobody was excused, and they're all continuing to listen to this case. So that was how the day started off, with a little bit of silence. We weren't able to see what's going on. And that was it. So we had to start a little bit later today. Well, when we eventually did get started, we started off with Dr. Azik Wolf. Dr. Azik Wolf is a brain surgeon, a neurosurgeon. Okay. You know how the saying goes, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to understand this? Well, he is actually the brain surgeon. So you're dealing with a very, very intelligent individual. And we're going to hear exactly how intelligent it is in a minute. And let's start off a little bit with getting to know Dr. Wolf, a little bit about his schedule. So take a listen to Dr. Wolf's schedule.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, spell your first name and last name for the court reporter?
Sure. My first name is Isaac, A-I-Z-I-K. It's phonetic. Last name is Wolf, W-O-L-F, like the real thing.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a brain surgeon.
Is there a special part of medicine that you study?
Well, my main
Well, yeah, brain surgery, but okay.
interest in brain surgery is brain tumors and trigeminal neuralgia. But I also specialize in movement disorders. I do pediatrics and adults.
Are you an active working neurosurgeon?
I'm very active working neurosurgeon. I get up every day at 4:30 in the morning to go to work.
Which I know this is going to become as a surprise to you, but I actually do not get up at 4:30 in the morning. I know a lot of you thought that's what my day starts off like, but I mean, unless my kids wake me up, but I do not wake up at 4:30 in the morning usually. So we're seeing how his day begins.
5 days a week. I take call 300 days out of 365 days a year.
Did you work yesterday?
Yes, I did.
What type of work did you do yesterday?
I did 2 brain surgeries yesterday.
Now, I know this is also may come as a surprise to some of you, but I did not do any surgery yesterday. I did not do brain surgery or any surgery, although some people will actually consider what I do here brain surgery. So I'm just saying, but he actually is really doing the brain surgery.
Are you working tomorrow?
I have 4 surgeries scheduled for tomorrow, which is why this is a little bit delayed for me, and I have 4 on Friday.
And what type of surgeries do you have tomorrow and Friday?
I have 3 brain tumors, 1 trigeminal neuralgia, and on Friday I have 4 patients with movement disorders.
You're here today as a witness. How much of your practice, how much % of your income is from being a consultant or a witness for a case?
Probably less than 1%. I don't do this for a living.
Right. And this is exactly the best type of expert witness that you want. Someone who is not a professional expert witness. Okay. Now, there are many doctors out there who are not brain surgeons who actually make more money doing testifying in trials or reviewing, making reports or writing reports, doing this type of work than they do in their actual practice. Well, when you're a brain surgeon, you probably don't need to do that. You probably make more money doing brain surgery than reviewing a case for a lawyer. So again, he's saying well, probably less than 1% of his practice is devoted to this. And he's only kind of brought into these cases where they need that level of expertise because they literally can't find anybody else to do it. So that's when he comes to testify. So you're talking about this is the best type of witness, of expert. His credibility is through the roof. Everyone's going to believe what he says. And you have to be very careful when you're dealing with this type of witness, especially when he's against you. But let's listen to what he has to say.
I want you to take us through some of your education and background. Could you share with us where you went to medical school and where you graduated from?
I went to Yale Medical School. I graduated summa cum laude.
So there's the regular brain surgeons out there, like the regular brilliant people. And then there's the people that go to Yale. Okay. So that's the next level. And then there's the people that go to Yale and they graduate summa cum laude. So he is that top 0.04% of genius brain surgeons in the world. I mean, that's kind of what he just laid out for everybody and the jury. So moving on from his qualifications, he started talking about the injury to John O'Keefe's head. Right now, we know that John O'Keefe suffered this blunt force trauma to the back of his head, which caused ecchymosis and caused the raccoon eye. So he's going to explain all this and what, most importantly, was the cause of that injury. So let's move ahead to where he actually talks about the cause, what he believes the cause of those injuries are. So first, he actually shows the picture to the jury, and we can't see it, so I can't play it for you anyway. And then he explains what he believes the cause of this injury is from.
Yes, I mean, like I said, it's a classic blunt trauma laceration.
Classic blunt trauma laceration. But he continues.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether this injury, the laceration and the basal fracture, was caused by Mr. O'Keefe falling backwards on the ground?
My opinion is that that's what caused his whole injury.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, that's what caused his injury. That's exactly what caused it. Him falling backwards on the ground.
The pattern of the laceration, do you have an opinion whether that is consistent with hitting the cold, hard ground?
Okay, now this is why it's going to be very important, this specific point, because as we heard from the defense that they're going to have this expert witness who's going to testify that the pattern of that abrasion to the back of his head, again, we can't see the picture of it, but the pattern to the back of his head, that abrasion must have been caused by a raised surface. That's what the defense's expert is going to say. So this is what Hank Brennan is trying to debunk right now with this expert who's asking him, does it have to be that pattern was caused by a raised surface or a ridge? Or could it also be just as well caused by falling backwards onto a smooth ground?
Objection, Your Honor. Can we have sidebar on that, please?
So I'm sustaining the objection, so no sidebar.
Your Honor.
Do you have an opinion, doctor, about whether that laceration on the back of his head was caused by a particular movement?
Well, the only way he could get this kind of an injury was to fall backwards, hit the back of his head, and then the resulting, energy forces going into his brain, into his base of his skull.
Would that type of laceration require Mr. O'Keefe to have hit a line type or ridge type object?
A ridge type of object?
Yes.
No, I mean, like I said, the tearing of the skin in that fashion, you could look it up, would be just a classic blunt trauma injury.
Is there any,
So he's saying no. I mean, the fact of that pattern, again, we don't get to see it, but that pattern does not say that it has to be by a raised surface. He said you can look it up. That type of abrasion could be caused by just falling backwards. So that was his testimony there. Then he got on to what exactly happened in the process of these orbital fractures and the raccoon eyes. And then he gets into Q contra Q. So Q contra Q. And this is the idea where the brain gets injured from the back because it falls backwards. The brain gets hit in the back. Then that force, because that such force causes the brain to go to the front of the head and gets damaged in the front. So you got the damage to the front of the brain, the damage to the back of the brain. That's called coup contra coup. And we're going to hear him, who better person to explain this than Dr. Wolf. He's going to explain how this was a coup contra coup type of injury.
brain? Can I ask you a couple of detailed questions about that?
Sure.
When you explained that the brain upon impact then shifts forward and hits the front of the skull, is there a medical term for that process?
Well, the medical term is a coup contra coup injury. So the coup is when you first hit. In this case, it was the back of the head, as summarized by the laceration in the back of the head, and the contusions that the pathologist and the ME found in the back of the brain. And then the brain shifts forward, and as it's traveling at a certain velocity, because it's thrust forward on the floor of the base of the skull, it's getting bumped. And it's getting, again, you can think of it as a hammer hitting a thumb. It's getting black and blue in the areas that are sharpest.
Are there symptoms that result of the process coup contra coup?
It's, this is clinically, it varies. I mean, you can go from anywhere from a simple concussion where you sort of are unaware of what happened, but you're still awake, you're confused, all the way to, ultimately being in a coma.
Can this type of injury, the coup contra coup, and what you see in the review of your files, could this type of injury happen from an attack by a weapon, like a bat or a hammer?
Well, he did not have a depressed skull fracture. So any focal hit like that would more likely than not have caused a depressed skull fracture. Blunt trauma, the way he had, the assumption, would cause the coup contre coup without a depressed skull fracture.
So there he explains that, again, taking a lot of the sales out of the defense here, that if the defense is going to claim that John O'Keefe was hit with a baseball bat or a crowbar or any sort of item to the back of his head, and that's what caused this injury, then he says it's not consistent with the findings, because you would expect to find a depressed skull fracture. I think that's what he said. So that was not there. That was not in. John O'Keefe did not suffer from that depressed skull fracture. And since that was not there, that would suggest that he was not beaten in the back of his head with a metal object like a bat or a crowbar. Now, does this mean that he did not get beaten up in the house and somehow fell backwards and he landed on the basement stairs or on the floor in the house? That's still consistent with Dr. Wolf. But if the defense is going to get up there and suggest to the jury that this was caused by somebody hitting him with a baseball bat, well, Dr. Wolf is very clearly saying that it's not consistent with the injuries that you found on John O'Keefe. So this is not exactly how the defense should go about it. They should more, if the defense is going to try to argue this to the jury, then just suggest that when he was in the house, somehow he got into a struggle and they just smashed him to the floor the same way he would have smashed his head to the ground falling backwards if he'd be outside. So that seems to be how the defense is going to have to present their case if they want to be consistent with what Dr. Wolf is saying. So moving on to how fast would this have incapacitated him and killed him? So here is where he's giving an opinion about how fast he would have died. And this is, all again, a very important part. How long could he have lived? And is this death the primary cause of blunt force trauma and a secondary cause hyperthermia? Or is it all from this blunt force trauma, which, again, we heard from Alan Jackson in the opening statement that seems that their expert is going to say that he was dead within seconds, apparently, from when he got this blunt force trauma. And we're going to see that Dr. Wolf does not agree with that.
Take us back now to after the fall. Would Mr. O'Keefe, in your study and opinion, have died immediately?
No.
Can you?
So very clearly he says no. And then he starts getting into how long a person could live. But he says no, he would not have died right away. And then again, he's asked at the end of his testimony, very similar question. So I'll pull that up here.
Ask you questions about whether you had an opinion about Mr. O'Keefe and when he died. I want to ask it in the form of a formal opinion. Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of medical certainty whether Mr. O'Keefe died immediately or within 15 minutes?
No, I don't think he died immediately. Neither the hyperthermia nor this kind of head injury would kill you immediately in any clinical experience I have.
Now, I don't know why he stopped there and said, oh yeah, and not within 15 minutes. It seems like he stopped himself, but he did say that he would not have died immediately. And again, if I was Hank Brent, I would have said, okay, what about 15 minutes? Just because if that was an important part of the case, then I'd probably follow up with that. But it almost seems like he hesitated there. He didn't want to say the 15 minutes, but he did say that he would not have died immediately. So, and if the defense's expert is going to say that he would have died immediately, well, you got this, it's going to be a battle of the experts. And this guy is a very credible expert. So then we moved on to cross-examination. And when you are cross-examining a witness like this, it's very, very difficult. Okay. It's a very difficult cross-examination. And you'll see right away from his posture that he's not this expert, Dr. Wolf, he's not going to fight him with anything. He's going to right away acknowledge everything that he needs to. And you're going to see a very big difference between this expert and, let's say, Shannon Burgess and, Yuri Buchanan. So you see a much different type of way that he answers questions, even on cross-examination. But let's just pull ahead to the cross-examination where it begins. So you can see what Robert Alessi does. And he does a good job, exactly what he's trying to establish. He keeps very short and he makes a few points and then he sits down. That's it.
So none of your typical days, none of the past typical months have involved forensic pathology, have they? You haven't acted as a forensic pathologist.
I am. If you could have asked that question very straightforward. I am not a forensic pathologist. I'm a brain surgeon.
Right.
Right. So he has no problem saying he's like, yeah, I'm not a forensic pathologist. I'm a brain surgeon. Like very open about it, not trying to fight him. Yes, I'm a brain surgeon, not a forensic pathologist.
And you don't perform autopsies, correct, sir? You're a brain surgeon.
Correct. In other words, I see more brains than the forensic pathologist.
Right.
Right. So he's saying, he kind of says, yeah, I see more brains than them because I'm operating on brains every single day, you know?
And is it correct to say that the brains that you see are of living people?
Correct.
Okay. So what I'd like,
Right. And right away he acknowledges this. He doesn't fight back. Yeah, of course, the brains that I see are from living people. And once they're dead, I don't examine their brains because they're dead. I'm trying to keep people alive. That's what I do as a doctor. I'm not a forensic pathologist. So there's no pushback. There's no saying, well, I don't need to. There's no, I'm just as good as them. He doesn't need it. This is how an expert who's very comfortable with his position testifies. He's not trying to fight everything and try to explain everything away. He says, that's right. I only see living brains. And that's it. That's how he leaves it.
to do is to go to a different part of the head than was discussed, but sticking with the deceit.
Excuse me, I didn't hear the last
I'm
word.
sorry, with the topic is going to be Mr. O'Keefe, the deceit in this
Okay.
matter, sir. You testified about raccoon eyes. The medical term for that, sir, is ecchymosis, right?
Correct.
And ecchymosis, raccoon eyes, does not cause a laceration to form on an eyelid, does it?
No.
So very clearly, and this is, again, a very strong point for the defense, is that even with everything that you explained, all the ecchymosis and this blunt force trauma and how it could be caused from him falling backwards, okay, that's great. But it wouldn't explain or account for the laceration on John O'Keefe's eye, right? The ecchymosis is not going to cause that. And he very clearly says that. And this falling backwards is not going to cause that. So how did it get there? Well, the Commonwealth is going to claim that it got there because pieces of glass shattered and scratched his eye, or the taillight shattered and scratched, and a piece scratched his eye. That's the Commonwealth's position. And the defense position is always obviously going to be that, no, that was caused from a fight. And maybe in the fight, in the struggle, he was thrown backwards and fell backwards. And that's how he got that injury. So that's really the rest of his testimony, just to bring out this point that how did this laceration get in the right eyelid? He has no idea. And then he also establishes with this witness that scratch from the right eyelid had to have come from outside of the eye. Someone must have inflicted that injury, whether it's from a piece of glass or some sort of trauma would have caused that laceration to the right eyelid. Okay, so that's what he establishes with this witness. And then he sits down. And because that's all you need to do with this type of witness, you just have to make sure that your entire case is not completely destroyed. And then, you can kind of then rely on your own expert witnesses and argue that to the jury. So that is what they do. Okay, then we moved on to Christina Hanley. Now, there was a lot of testimony from Christina Hanley, and I'm not going to make you sit through and watch all of it. I'm going to summarize it in hopefully 2-3 minutes, okay? Because it really comes down to just a few points. And that is that she looked at all of the glass that was recovered from the scene, and she compared it with the other glass that was recovered from the scene. And then she looked also at the debris in John O'Keefe's sweatshirt or t-shirt. Okay, now remember, we heard already from before from Maureen Hartnett that she took this metal spatula and scratched off from John O'Keefe's shirt, his t-shirt and his sweatshirt, and there was some debris there. Now, she didn't examine the debris. That is what Christina Hanley's job is going to do. So Christina Hanley, examined this debris, and she was able to determine that this debris is consistent with the taillight or from another source with similar characteristics. So she can't rule out it's from some other source with similar characteristics, but it would definitely be consistent with the taillight. Okay, so very, very small, tiny, tiny pieces of debris which were located in the t-shirt and the sweatshirt. And again, this definitely helps the Commonwealth's case here, because the suggestion is that he was hit somehow with that car and some minute tiny pieces of debris of that taillight ended up in his clothing. So that is what Christina Hanley's testimony was with respect to the debris. And then with the glass, probably she lost everybody. And it's not her fault, but she's dealing with like 25 different pieces of glass. She's labeling them. She has to deal with them in that way. And just people don't know exactly what she's talking about. So luckily, we have Alan Jackson and the defense who put together a very nice chart. So I'm just going to pull up the chart, and this literally could have saved probably 3 hours of testimony today if we just would have said, can we just agree on this chart what's going on here? And then maybe the prosecution could have added some things if they wanted. But instead, we had to go through the entire testimony of Christina Hanley. So let's pull up the chart that Alan Jackson brought up on cross-examination, which will make things a lot clearer. And he brings out also one very important part with this chart. Well, the first thing that he brings out, by the way, is that, the fact that you found this debris in John O'Keefe's t-shirt doesn't automatically mean it's from the taillight. It could have come from another place also. And again, it has to be similar characteristics. What other materials do you have? That's not clear, but he's just bringing out that point. Okay, but then we get into this very interesting chart. So before I play it, just take a look at this chart for a minute. And you see on the left side, 3-2 is the cup. Now, you remember that there was a glass cup that was recovered at the scene. Then you had this glass on the bumper. That's the next column, 3-3. Then 7-12 and 7-14 were pieces of glass that were recovered not from the bumper, but somewhere around 34 Fairview. So even either on the street of 34 Fairview or on the lawn area, it's recovered around there. Okay, so you got the glass cup, you got the bumper, and you got pieces that were recovered from the street. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Because if you look at the bumper glass. So there were 5 pieces of bumper, A, B, C, D, and E. If you look at A and B, the glass that was found in the bumper is inconsistent. Now, let's pause for a second and think about what this means when she says it's inconsistent, okay? Because she was able to take these minute, tiny pieces of plastic and was able to tell us that these pieces of plastic, these tiny, tiny, tiny pieces of plastic were consistent with the taillight. Okay, so if you think that this small amount is going to be difficult to compare with other pieces of glass, that is most likely going to be an incorrect conclusion because she's able to take these tiny, tiny, tiny pieces of plastic and say it's from the taillight. Well, then she should be able to do the same thing with glass. So now she takes these pieces of glass, A and B, and she is not able to compare it and say that it's consistent with anything. So where is this glass from? It's not from the cup. It's not from the glass cup. It's not consistent with any other piece that she found. So where did these pieces of glass come from? That is a very good question. Okay, so that's A and B from the bumper. Now E gets a little bit more interesting. Okay, but before we get to E, let's move on to the next column here, 7-12. 7-12 were 9 pieces that were recovered by who? By Yuri Buchanan. And a number of them, A, B, C, D, F, and K, were all consistent with the cup. E, I, and L were not consistent with the glass cup. Okay, but now let's move on to E. And this is where Alan Jackson makes a very interesting point, which I'm sure he's going to come back to during cross-examination. But listen to the point that he makes with respect to number E. There was glass from the bumper that was recovered by who? Michael Proctor. So listen to this.
Of bumper glass, the only piece of bumper glass to match anything else in your analysis. Matched what? What was consistent with what?
So item 3-3, piece E, was consistent in physical and instrumental properties with the sample that I took from item 7-14.
Which is a single piece of glass recovered by Michael Proctor, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so here's the point that he's making. Okay, if you look at the bumper glass and you see this is E, which is recovered from the bumper. Now, A and B are not consistent with anything. But E, which was recovered by who? By the villain in this case, which the defense is definitely making him a villain, which is what they have to do. This glass was recovered by Michael Proctor, E, and it's comparing, it's consistent with 7-14, which was also glass that was recovered by Michael Proctor. So these pieces of glass, 7-14, match with E. So again, E does not match with the cup. No pieces on the bumper match with the glass cup, but E does match with other pieces of glass that were found around 34 Fairview, which were also recovered by the same person, Michael Proctor. So where did these pieces of glass come from? E from the bumper and 7-14, the cup and the 7-12, where did they come from? That is the question. So that is exactly how Alan Jackson left it. So that's it. That was the extent of the testimony today. Christina Hanley and Dr. Azik Wolf after the whole excitement with the jurors. But again, all the jurors are still seated. No one was thrown off. No one was dismissed. They're all still sitting there and watching the trial until some of them are going to get excused before they deliberate. So that is going to be it for today. That was day 20. Day 21 is going to begin again Tuesday, 9 a.m. So we'll see you all back here for that beginning of the live stream then. And over the weekend, hopefully tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday or Monday, we are going to be hopefully joined by a few special guests to discuss more about the Karen Read case and recap everything that's been going on up until now. So that is going to be it for now. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and like, and we will see you next time.